The iron had been left outside all night, and it took her skin the way winter takes bare hands. 2 guards dragged her across packed earth. Neither of them looked at her face. 300 wolves stood ringed around the mouth of the pit. Quiet. Not the quiet of respect, the quiet of appetite. She had scrubbed floors for half of them. Learned their children's names. This morning, not one of them lifted their eyes. She kept her chin down. 3 years, she had lived inside that shape. But this morning the shape didn't fit anymore. Beneath her collar, the thing she had guarded harder than her own life was beginning to burn. Across the pit, the iron gate shrieked upward. Old blood. Wet fur. Something breathing low and starved. She pressed her back flat to the stone. And it lunged. The iron had been left outside all night, and it took her skin the way winter takes bare hands. That was the first thing Kestrel Duskmere noticed. Before the crowd. Before the smell of the arena. Just cold, biting into both wrists, dragging her forward across packed earth that 300 years of boots had beaten flat and hard as a table. 2 guards. 1 on each side. Neither of them looking at her face. Which was a mercy of a kind, she supposed. It is easier to drag something you never have to look at. She kept her chin down. Old habit. 3 years old, to be exact, built one flinch at a time, until it stopped being a habit, and became simply the shape she lived in. Except this morning the shape didn't fit anymore. Because every wolf in Ironclaw territory had come to watch her walk. They stood in a ring around the courtyard. Hundreds of them. Quiet in that particular way a crowd goes quiet right before something terrible, which is not the quiet of respect. It is the quiet of appetite. Kestrel had scrubbed floors for half these people. Carried firewood past their doors, through 2 hard winters. Learned their names, their children's names, which of them liked the bread cut thick, and which of them pretended not to care. Not one of them met her eyes. Good, she thought. Let them look at the dirt. Looking away has kept me breathing for 3 years. Maybe it buys me 10 more minutes. She didn't believe it. She thought it anyway. Because thinking a thing and believing it are 2 entirely different animals, and she had learned the difference the expensive way. 4 hours ago she had been kneading bread in the packhouse kitchen. Flour to the elbows. Steam curling off the ovens in slow ropes. Marin beside her complaining about a torn ham, both of them laughing at nothing worth laughing at, the way you laugh on a morning that still belongs to you. Which was, she understood now, the last ordinary hour of her life. Until the guards came, through the kitchen door without knocking. Until every head in that room turned toward her at once. Until she felt it, low in her stomach, that specific dropping sensation that had visited her exactly twice before. Once, 6 years ago, standing in the ash of her father's house. And now. She hadn't fought. Hadn't screamed. 3 years of practiced smallness had scrubbed that instinct clean out of her. So she set down the dough. Wiped her hands on her apron, slow, because her hands wanted something to do. And let them take her. Because some cold, quiet part of her had always known this morning was coming. She had simply expected it to arrive, as a discovery. Not as an accusation. The stone arena rose ahead of her like a wound in the earth. Round. Deep. Old enough that moss had eaten down into the grooves between the blocks, and nobody had ever bothered to scrape it out, because nobody who went into that pit had ever needed the moss to look nice. At its mouth stood Beta Bastion Reyes, with a scroll in his hand, and a face doing that careful trained thing faces do, when they have been taught to show nothing at all. Kestrel Duskmere. His voice carried. It was built to carry. You stand accused before this pack of theft. Of deception. And of crimes against the bloodline of Ironclaw. The crowd made a sound. Low. Long. A held breath finally let go. Kestrel's heart slammed against her ribs, and it wasn't fear exactly, or not only fear. It felt like her whole body remembering at once every single day she had spent making herself too small to be looked at. And here she stood. Looked at. By everyone. All at once. I didn't steal anything. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect, and she was almost proud of it. Almost. There's been a mistake. Nothing came back at her but silence. Bastion unrolled the scroll further, though she suspected he had every word of it memorized already. 3 nights passed, the Duskfire pendant was taken from the Alpha's vault. The wards flagged your scent in the corridor outside the vault door. There it was. And the floor of her stomach went out from under her. Not because it was a lie. Because it was nearly the truth, and nearly the truth is so much harder to fight than a clean lie. A lie you can take apart. Nearly truth just sits there. Comfortable. Immovable. Smiling at you. I clean that corridor, she said. Every week. Of course my scent is there. Convenient, somebody muttered from the ring. Not quietly enough. I never went into the vault. Her chin came up. She couldn't stop it. Something in her had run out of patience for begging, with her eyes on her own feet. I'll swear it. On anything you want to name. Your life, said a new voice. Should do. The crowd opened. Alpha Ronan Ashbourne came, through it the way water comes, through a channel dug for exactly that purpose. Which, Kestrel supposed, it had been. She had seen him before. You cannot work 3 years under a packhouse roof and never see its alpha. But she had made a careful, deliberate, daily practice of never letting him see her. Head down when he passed. Footsteps quiet. Presents folded away small, like linen nobody needed yet. Now his eyes found her, and it landed on her like a hand at the back of her neck. Not cruel. Just complete. Like he was reading something written on the inside of her skull, that she had never given anyone permission to open. 6.5 feet of him. Dark hair loose past his shoulders. Shoulders built for exactly this, for standing in front of crowds, and making them go silent by existing at them. And the eyes. Amber. Burning low and banked, the way fire burns, when it has decided not to hurry. Kestrel hated that her breath caught. Hated it in a specific, itemized way, and filed the hatred somewhere she could find it later, because later she was clearly going to need a long list of things to be furious about. The Duskfire pendant has held this territory's borders for 200 years, Ronan said, and though he spoke to the crowd, he did not once look away from her face. Since the day it was given into Ironclaw's keeping. Without it, our wards thin. If an enemy reached inside my walls to take it. He let that sit. Didn't finish it. Then the old law applies. I didn't take it, Kestrel said. Quiet. Too quiet. The words drowned instantly under the noise of the crowd closing over her like water over a dropped stone. Then you have nothing to fear. Bastion's voice again. Flat. Final. He tipped his head to the guards. Take her to the pit. The pit. Her knees nearly went out from under her right there in the dirt, and she hated her body for that too, hated how fast fear could turn bone into water. She knew the stories. Every servant did. Whispered over cold soup at midnight, the kind of story you pass around exactly, because it is too ugly to say in daylight. Trial by combat. That was the polite name for it. Nobody said the other name out loud. They hauled her up steps worn smooth by everyone who had gone up them before. Through an archway. Down into a circle of stone maybe 30 paces across, the walls 12 feet high, and slicked flat, built by men who had thought carefully about the problem of things trying to climb out. The pack ringed the rim above her. Looking down the way you look at something already finished. Across the pit stood an iron gate. And behind the gate, she heard it, before she saw it. Something breathing. Low and wet and hungry. The breathing of a thing that had given up on words a long time ago. 3 days passed, Ronan announced, from directly above her now, we took a Lycan that had been killing in the northern villages. It has not been fed since. He let that hang in the air like smoke, over a fire. The law is simple. Survive 15 minutes. You are proven innocent. A pause. If you cannot. He didn't finish that one either. Nobody in this pack finishes anything, Kestrel thought, half hysterical, backing toward the wall, with her palms flat on cold stone. They just let the ends of their sentences hang there like laundry. Like it's a local custom. No. Please. Her spine hit the wall, and some cold clinical corner of her brain reported, calmly, that there was nowhere further back to go. I'm a servant. I don't know how to fight. Not a Lycan. Nobody fights a Lycan. Because Lycans were not wolves. Not anymore. A Lycan was what a wolf became when the shift broke somewhere in the middle and never came back. Locked halfway. Claw and jaw, and man, forever caught between, and forever furious about being caught. Trained warriors died to Lycans. And this one had not eaten in 3 days. Which meant it would not simply kill her. It would be starving the entire time it did. You should have considered that, Bastion said, and not unkindly, which somehow made it very much worse, before you betrayed your pack. The gate mechanism groaned. Wait. Her voice split down the middle. Whoever took that pendant, it wasn't me. I'm nobody. What would I even do with? Ronan raised his hand. The guards turned the wheel. The gate shrieked up on rusted iron, and the smell reached her, before the shape did. Old blood. Wet fur. Something feral and starved past any hope of reasoning with. Then she saw it. The Lycan came, through on all fours, and it was larger than anything Kestrel had ever put eyes on. Gray fur matted over old scar tissue. Muscle rolling under the hide like something trying to get out of its own body. Its jaw hung loose around teeth built for tearing, and nothing else. And its eyes. Sick yellow, glowing faint in the shadow under the gate. They found her. It snarled, and the sound came from somewhere underneath the earth. Kestrel pressed herself flat to the wall, and every rational thought she had ever owned collapsed into one clean ringing certainty. This is it. This is the end of me. Torn open in a pit, while 300 people watch, for something I never did, and not one of them will remember my name by winter. The Lycan came forward. One step. Another. Saliva stringing from its jaw, as it scented the air, head dropping into the crouch of a thing about to spend everything it has. And somewhere deep inside her, in a place she had bricked, over 3 years ago, one careful brick at a time, something stirred. Her wolf. Awake. Straining at the mortar. She couldn't let it out. If it came out, if anyone in that ring saw what she actually was, that was so much worse than dying. So she stood there. Frozen. Watching death gather itself. It lunged. Kestrel screamed and threw her arms up. Useless animal reflex. 2 thin forearms against 300 pounds of starvation. The Lycan stopped. In the air. Body gone rigid mid-leap. It came down inches, from her boots, claws cracking the stone under its own weight, and then nothing. No follow-through. No second try. The whole arena stopped breathing at once. Then, slowly. Terribly slowly. The huge head lowered. The ears went flat. And the creature folded itself down, onto its belly in front of her, muzzle pressed to the stone, in a posture Kestrel had never in her life seen a Lycan take. Submission. What are you doing? Her own voice, thin and strange in her ears. "What are you doing?" It didn't move. It lay there shaking, and out of its chest came a sound that was not a growl at all. Closer to a whine. Something almost reverent, which made no sense, because Lycans knew hunger and rage and nothing in between. That was the entire point of what a Lycan was. Except this one lay at her feet like she was something to kneel to instead of something to eat. "It's a trick." Bastion, from above, tight and disbelieving. "Some kind of?" "Quiet," Ronan said, and even from the rim, Kestrel felt that word settle on the back of her neck. "I want to watch this." She lowered her hands. They were still shaking. The Lycan stayed down. Its breathing slowed. Slowed further. And then, unmistakably, began to match hers. Breath for breath, in and out, like an instrument tuning itself to a note it had been searching for. Something in her chest, in that bricked-over place, pulsed. Warm. Gold. Entirely unfamiliar and somehow older than she was. "Why won't you attack me?" she whispered. But a buried part of her already knew. This was not fear, and it was not a trick. This was recognition. The beast had looked at her, and seen something its blood had been shaped, over generations, to answer. "What manner of deception is this?" The voice came down, through the murmuring like a blade laid flat against skin. Luna Isolde Ashbourne. The Alpha's mother. Standing at the pit's edge, with her arms folded, and her eyes narrowed, into something that resembled suspicion, and sat, underneath, a great deal closer to satisfaction. "The girl has enchanted the beast," Isolde said. "Dark magic. There is no other explanation." The crowd agreed, with her fast and eagerly, the way crowds always agree, with anyone who hands them a story simpler than the truth. Of course, Kestrel thought. Of course. Nobody looks at a miracle and thinks miracle. They think trick. Because a trick is cheaper. A trick doesn't ask anything of you afterward. "Take off her chains," Ronan said. The arena went silent again. A different silence. Thinner. With an edge on it. Bastion stared down at his Alpha, as though the words had arrived in the wrong order. "Alpha. If she is using magic on the beast. Take off her chains." Same words. Twice the weight. 2 guards climbed down, into the pit walking the way men walk toward something they are not confident won't bite. The Lycan's head lifted a fraction, lip curling back, one flash of warning, and then it held. It didn't rise from the bow. Not until the iron finally dropped from her wrists, and the guards backed off fast enough to scrape their boots. Then the Lycan stood. Careful. Low. Deliberate. And put its entire body between Kestrel and every other living thing inside that circle. "I didn't do anything to it." Her voice found some strength, though confusion was still tearing through her faster than she could keep up. "I've never seen this creature before. I don't know why it's." "Show me your neck," Ronan said. Everything in her went still. Because there was something new in his voice. Not suspicion anymore. Something closer to a man walking the edge of an answer he already half knows, and does not want to say aloud in front of 300 witnesses. Her hand flew to her throat, before she could stop it, fingers finding the edge of the servant's collar she had worn every single day for 3 years. Beneath it. The one thing she had guarded harder than her own life. "I can't." "You can." He was already moving, coming down the pit steps, with an unhurried grace that made the skin along her arms lift. "And you will. Because that animal knows exactly what you are. And I intend to see it myself." The crowd pressed in against the rim, hungry now in a new way. Grim, and she did not yet know why that name had arrived in her head fully formed, growled low and did not move an inch. Ronan stopped 10 feet away. 10 feet, and she could still feel him from there. Dominance coming off him in slow waves that made her wolf shove hard against the inside of her ribs, wanting to drop, wanting to show throat, wanting to hand itself over to something ancient and total. She would not. Don't make me do this. The words came out cracked. I've lived quietly. I've hurt nobody. I only ever wanted. The pendant was taken 3 nights ago, Ronan said, straight through her. The same night, the eastern wards flagged an intrusion. Red Fang has been leaning on our borders for months. If they have the Duskfire. Another step. I need to know who you are. Because that beast is bowing to you like your royalty. And in 3 years under my own roof, I never once caught what you were hiding. How could you, Kestrel said, and something old and bitter finally cracked open in her chest, when you never once looked at me. Silence. Nobody did. Her voice wavered and came back. That was the entire point of me. I'm looking now. The gentleness in it nearly finished what the Lycan had failed to start. 3 years of being nothing. A shadow moving down corridors in a house full of people, who had never once asked her name a second time. And now here she stood, with her chains gone, a starving Lycan bowed across her feet, and the most powerful alpha in 3 territories asking, quietly, for the only thing she had sworn to take to her grave. There was no door left to shut. No corridor left to vanish down. So, slowly, with hands she could not will still, Kestrel pulled the collar of her dress aside. The mark blazed across her throat like something lit, from underneath the skin. A crescent moon cradled between 2 wolves, worked in silver, that seemed to carry its own light, with no help from the sun. The crowd came apart. The chosen line. Somebody said it the way you'd say a curse. Duskmere. That blood was ended. Another voice, further back. 6 years ago. All of them. Ronan went very still. His eyes stayed on the mark, and when he finally spoke his voice had gone careful in a way she hadn't heard from him yet. The voice of a man crossing ice he isn't certain will hold. Your name, he said. All of it. Her throat closed around it for a long moment. 3 years of guarding this exact sentence, and now it simply had to be said out loud, in the open, with nowhere left to run to afterward. Kestrel Duskmere. Quiet. Steady, because she made it steady by force. Daughter of Alpha Thane Duskmere. Last of the chosen line. The name dropped, into the crowd like a stone, into standing water, and the rings went out in every direction. The Duskmere line had held the eastern territories for 500 years. Blessed, the old story said, by the moon herself. Able to quiet any wolf, even the feral ones, even the ones lost, so far inside the beast, that nothing else could reach in after them. 6 years ago 3 rival packs had banded together in a single night, and burned that bloodline down to the foundation. Every man. Every woman. Every child asleep in every bed. Everyone had agreed it ended there. You were 16, when your pack fell, Ronan said, and she could watch him assembling her whole history in real time behind those amber eyes. You should have died with them. I was away. The memory still sat in her chest like something swallowed whole, and never digested. Visiting an aunt. 2 days' ride outside our border. By the time the word reached me, by the time I got home. Her voice caught. She let it catch. She didn't smooth it over this time. There was nothing left to come home to. Only ash. The Lycan pressed its enormous body against her leg. Wordless. She dropped her hand into the matted fur, without thinking about it, and the creature leaned into her palm like a thing starved for exactly that and nothing else. I knew what would happen if anyone learned, she went on. The packs that ended my family would come back and finish the work. And the ones that didn't would want to use me. Make me bend their enemies' wolves for them. Build somebody an empire on my back. So you hid. I found the biggest pack I could. Big enough that one more girl in an apron wouldn't be counted. She swallowed. And I buried the rest. For 3 years you scrubbed my floors. His voice had gone rough at the edges. Pretending to be powerless. It was the only way I knew to stay alive. He closed the last of the distance. Close enough now that she could feel the heat coming off him. Close enough to catch pine, and old leather, and something underneath both that she had no name for yet. Look at me, he said. Gently. An order wearing the clothes of a request. She lifted her eyes. And the moment they locked, something hit her in the chest, with the force of a thrown stone. Her wolf surged forward inside her, howling with a recognition, so complete it took the air out of her lungs, and gold light broke behind her eyes bright enough to blind. Mate. The word went through every cell she had. Undeniable. Absolute. No. Not now. Not him. Not today, of all the possible days. Kestrel staggered back a step, one hand flying up to her own sternum, as though she could physically hold the thing in. Ronan's pupils had blown wide. His breathing had gone ragged. And for one suspended second she watched him fight the exact battle she was fighting, the animal wanting to take, the man trying to think. He didn't say the word. That surprised her more than the bond had. His hand came up. Reached for her wrist. Stopped an inch short and hung there, as though some part of him understood, even through the roar of it, that touching her now, in front of 300 witnesses, and a mother, who already hated her, would be the single worst thing he could do. You feel it, he said instead. Low. Meant only for her. Yes. No point lying. Not with the bond humming between them like a wire in wind. I feel it. I'm not going to say it out loud. His jaw was tight, and every word was visibly costing him something. Not here. Because the second I say it in front of them, you stop being a person to this pack. You become a claim. A prize. A thing to be fought over instead of somebody to be protected. Kestrel stared at him. Because that was not what she had braced for. Not from an alpha. Not from anyone who had just felt what he had clearly felt. You'd wait, she said slowly. Even now. I've waited 3 years without knowing you existed. Something dry and worn thin moved through his voice, the ghost of humor arriving at an extremely poor moment. A few more days won't kill me. They might kill me, she muttered, before she could stop her own mouth. One corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. Adjacent to one. Then I'll try to be quick about the rest of it. Above them the crowd had gone, from murmuring to something closer to a roar, and Bastion's voice cut down, through it, tight with disbelief. Alpha. The theft charge. Was never hers to answer, Ronan said, turning, and the temperature of his voice dropped straight through the floor. Who brought the accusation, Bastion? A pause from above. A long one. Long enough that Kestrel understood the answer before it arrived. Luna Isolde, Alpha. Bastion's voice had gone very careful. She said she caught the girl's scent near the vault herself. Every eye in the arena swung toward the woman at the rim. Isolde Ashbourne did not flinch. Kestrel would grant her that much later, when she had enough distance to be fair about it. The woman stood there in her good dark clothes, with her chin up like a queen receiving an insult from somebody beneath her notice. Mother. Ronan's voice went down another 10 degrees. Explain how you came to suspect a kitchen servant of theft. I was protecting this pack. Smooth as poured glass. Her scent was near the vault. I investigated further. What I found was disturbing. Plainly. The girl carries the Duskmere mark. Isolde gestured at her the way you point out a stain on good linen. The same blood that was ended for trying to bend every pack in the East under its hand. Their gift was never a blessing, Ronan. It was a leash. Is that what you want standing beside you? Something that can strip the will out of any wolf in this territory the moment it decides to? The crowd shifted, and Kestrel felt the shift go through them like a current through water. Felt the awe of a minute ago curdling back into doubt. That is not what the gift was for. Her own voice, cutting through before she had entirely decided to use it. The chosen line was blessed to protect. To quiet the wolves, who could not quiet themselves. That was all of it. That was the whole of the promise. Your family used it to rule, Isolde said flatly, until 3 packs rose up and put them down like the animals they had let themselves become. Something hot went up Kestrel's spine. My family was killed in their sleep, she said. Children murdered in their beds. If that is your idea of justice, then I am glad I hid what I was. Better 3 years of scrubbing your floors than being called sister by wolves, who toast a massacre. And Isolde's face did something. It was small. It lasted less than a breath. But Kestrel had spent 3 years learning to read the smallest changes in a room's weather just to survive them, and she caught it. The woman's jaw tightened. Her eyes went somewhere else, some middle distance beyond the pit, and beyond the crowd, and for one strange half-second the polish went out of her entirely. I know what was done that night, Isolde said. And stopped. Just stopped. Mid-thought. As though whatever came next had been reached for, and then deliberately put back down. I know what was done, she repeated, harder now, the glass reassembling itself over her face. Which is precisely why I will not watch it happen here. Kestrel filed that away. She didn't know what she was filing. She only knew that a woman that composed does not lose the thread of her own sentence, and that the thing Isolde had swallowed had tasted, from the outside, a great deal more like grief than like triumph. Enough. Ronan's voice cracked across the arena. He turned to face his mother fully, and whatever softness had been in him a minute ago was gone, burned out at the root. Did you take the pendant? How dare you accuse? Did you take it? Not a question that time. An alpha's command, and Kestrel felt the weight of it press down over the whole pit like a hand laid flat. Watched Isolde's body lock rigid, as her wolf was forced, against everything she had, into submission underneath it. For a long moment, nothing. Then, through her teeth, the pendant is safe. A gasp went around the rim. I secured it, Isolde bit out, because I believed this territory was already compromised. I was protecting this pack from a danger none of you were willing to look at. You accused an innocent woman, Ronan said, low and even, and somehow the evenness was more frightening than shouting would have been, and sentenced her to be eaten in a pit. To cover what you had done yourself. I did what was necessary. And there, finally, the first real crack, something raw bleeding up through the polish. The Eastern Pack's already suspect Ironclaw is sheltering a Duskmere survivor. If they learn it is true, they will come together against us exactly the way they came together against her family. She is a danger to every soul under this roof, whether you are willing to see it or not. What I see, Ronan said, is a Luna, who lied to her alpha, twisted pack law to fit her own fear, and tried to have an innocent woman killed. A woman who happens to be. He stopped. Visibly. Caught the word an inch from his teeth, and put it back, and Kestrel watched him do it, watched exactly what it cost. An innocent woman, he said instead. Under my protection. He turned to Bastion, who stood at the rim, with the expression of a man watching his entire understanding of the world quietly rearrange its furniture. Beta Reyes. Take Luna Isolde to the holding cells, pending full tribunal. She is stripped of title and authority as of this moment. The crowd's shock broke open into noise. Isolde's face went white, then dark. You would choose her. A stranger. A leftover of a dead bloodline. Over your own blood. I would choose the truth, Ronan said. Over anyone. 2 guards moved to flank her. She didn't fight. She didn't need to. The look she threw back over her shoulder as they took her out did more damage than any struggle could have managed, and it landed square on Kestrel. Cold. Level. Promising. The kind of look that says this is not finished, whatever the rest of the face is currently arranged to pretend. Kestrel held it without blinking. 3 years of standing still under scrutiny had to be worth something. When Isolde was gone, swallowed into the crowd, Ronan turned back, and the fury drained out of him by degrees, replaced by something more worn. "You didn't say it," Kestrel said quietly, once the noise above had thinned to an uncertain murmur. "The word. You had it in your mouth, and you put it back." "No." His jaw worked once. "I didn't." "Why?" "Because the moment I say it in front of them, you stop being Kestrel." He kept his voice down, meant for the space between them and nowhere further. "You become mine in the way they understand the word. Property. Prize. Something to be guarded or stolen, depending on who's asking. I've watched what that does to people. I'm not doing it to you tonight." She studied him for a long moment. The Lycan, grim, and the name settled over him like a coat that had been waiting on a hook, leaned his weight against her leg, patient, warm, entirely unbothered by the chaos still rolling around above them. "You're a strange sort of alpha," she said finally. "So I'm told." The corner of his mouth again. Closer to a smile this time. Rarely as a compliment. "I didn't say it was one." "No," he agreed. "You didn't." And for one suspended moment, standing in a pit, where she had expected to die 20 minutes earlier, Kestrel nearly laughed. Caught it. Swallowed it. Because laughing felt like tempting whatever had decided to spare her tonight, into reconsidering the paperwork. Bastion reappeared at the rim, having handed his former Luna off to the guards, his expression stuck somewhere between duty and disbelief. "Alpha. Your orders." "Regarding the girl." "Regarding the pendant." "The pendant stays wherever my mother put it, until we retrieve it properly," Ronan said. "The charge against Kestrel Duskmere is dropped. As of now." A pause. "She is under my personal protection. Anyone with an objection may bring it to me. Directly." Nobody, judging by the quality of the silence, intended to bring anything to him directly. "And the beast," Bastion said carefully, eyeing Grimm, who had not moved, and did not appear to be considering it. "He stays with me," Kestrel said, before anyone could answer on her behalf. Her hand found the fur at his neck again. The Lycan leaned into it, and the sound that rumbled out of his chest was almost embarrassingly close to contentment. "I don't know how. I don't know what I did. But there's something underneath the rage in him. Something that's been lost a long time." She looked up. "I'd like to help him find the way back to it." Ronan watched her a long moment. Something moved behind his expression that she couldn't name yet. Not surprise. More like a man reaching a line in a story and recognizing it, because he had read the first half years ago, and forgotten he was still inside the book. "Then we'll make room for him," he said. Bastion looked between the two of them, then at the Lycan, then up at the crowd still buzzing along the rim, and let out the specific sigh of a man who had signed on for a considerably simpler job than the one now unfolding in front of him. "I'll see to the arrangements." They didn't leave the pit right away. Kestrel stayed where she was a moment longer, one hand still buried in Grimm's fur, watching the ring of faces slowly break apart above her. Some were already gone, hurrying off with an evening's worth of gossip to spend. Others lingered, unwilling to look away from whatever this had turned into. A few, she noticed, were not looking at her with fear at all. One of them stood at the rail, with her arms wrapped around her own ribs. Marin. Kitchen hand. 2 years of shared bread, and shared complaints, and slow afternoons, with flour up to the elbow. 2 years of being the closest thing to a friend Kestrel had permitted herself. The look on her face was not fear. It was not awe either. It was something more careful than both. Marin stayed a beat longer than the rest. Long enough that Kestrel half expected her to call out the way she used to across the kitchen, when the bread was rising wrong. She didn't. She only watched. Then turned and slipped away, into the tail end of the dispersing crowd, before Kestrel could decide whether what she'd seen on that face was guilt or grief. It could have been either. It could have been both. Kestrel had learned not to guess too fast at what a face is hiding. She had worn her own long enough to know exactly how well a good one holds. "You're staring at something," Ronan said, following her eyes. "An old friend. You don't trust her." "I trust everyone a little less tonight than I did this morning." Kestrel let her hand fall from Grimm's neck. "Present company excluded." "Provisionally." "Provisionally," he repeated, turning the word over like he was checking it for weight. "I'll take it." Above them, the last of the crowd was thinning into the dark. Beyond the arena wall, the packhouse lamps were being lit one by one, ordinary evening business resuming around the edges of a day that had been anything but. "There will be a tribunal," Ronan said, after a while. "For my mother. It won't be quick, and it won't be clean. She has allies in this pack, who will fight for her whatever she's done. You should know that before you decide whether you're staying." "I already know it." Kestrel looked down at Grimm, settled on the stone now, watching the two of them, with those strange clearing amber eyes. "I've spent 6 years learning exactly how far people will go to protect whichever version of the world happens to be convenient for them. Your mother isn't the first one who's tried." "No," Ronan agreed. "She won't be the last either." "But you stopped her tonight. In front of everyone." Kestrel looked up. "You could have done it quietly. Later. Somewhere with fewer eyes in it. You did it here, where it cost you the most." "I did it here," he said, "because you deserved to watch it happen. Not hear about it secondhand, afterward, like your life was a footnote in somebody else's decision." Something in her chest, some old cold guarded thing, shifted half an inch on its foundations. Not all the way. But enough that she felt the movement. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, and the bravado of the last hour finally began to thin out of her voice. "Any of it. Being looked at. Having a name people actually use out loud. I've spent 3 years getting very good at disappearing, and I don't know what I'm supposed to be instead." "Nobody's asking you to be anything tonight." His voice had gone gentle again. "Tonight you survived. That's the whole assignment. Tomorrow we can start on the rest of it. And the bond." She made herself say it. Because avoiding it felt exactly like the sort of thing the hidden version of her would have done, and she was trying, for the first time in a long while, to be slightly braver than that woman had been. "What happens with that?" "That," Ronan said, "is entirely your decision. Not mine. Not the pack's. Not even the bond's, whatever it currently believes it's owed by either of us." A dry edge crept back in. "I've waited this long, without knowing you were alive. I can wait, until you're ready to choose it. If you ever are." She studied his face in the dying light for a long moment. Looking for the catch. 3 years of survival had trained her to look for the catch in everything, because there was almost always one, tucked just under the surface of a kind sentence. She didn't find it. Not tonight. "All right," she said. "All right? All right, I believe you." Almost a smile. "Provisionally." "Provisionally," he echoed, and this time the smile actually reached his mouth. "I really will take it." Grimm rose off the stone, stretching in that odd broken way Lycan's move, pressed his enormous head briefly against her hip, and turned to pad toward the pit's exit, having apparently decided where everyone was going next, and seeing no particular reason to wait for the humans to work it out. "He's impatient," Ronan observed. "He's been waiting a long time too." Kestrel watched him go. For something. I don't think he knows what yet. Then that makes 3 of us. They climbed the steps together, out of the pit, and into the last gray of the evening. The crowd had scattered. The arena settled back, into silence behind them, and it was the ordinary kind of silence this time, not the hungry kind. Above the territory the first stars were coming, through the dusk, and Kestrel found herself looking up at them the way she had not permitted herself to in years. Not hiding. Not counting minutes, until she could vanish down a corridor. Just looking. They gave her a room in the eastern wing that night. Not his quarters. He hadn't offered, she hadn't asked, and some quiet understanding had passed between them, that neither wanted the pack waking up tomorrow, with more rumors than it already had stacked in the yard. Just a room. Clean. Warm. A real bed instead of the narrow cot she had folded herself onto for 3 years in the servants' hall. She sat on the edge of it a long time, before she let herself lie down. Grim had followed her the whole way, patting a half step behind, and now he arranged himself across the threshold of her door, as though he had been doing it his entire life instead of for the first time in it. Nobody had asked him to. Kestrel lay back on unfamiliar pillows, stared at an unfamiliar ceiling, and finally let herself shake. Because that is the part nobody tells you about surviving. It does not feel like winning. It feels like the ground giving out under feet that have been braced too long against a fall that never came. Her hands wouldn't quit trembling. Her chest ached, with that particular ache that arrives after you have spent hours holding your entire body rigid against a disaster that then, against every reasonable expectation, declined to happen. She thought about her father. Only for a moment. The sound of his voice working, through the old words of the bloodline. Gifts to protect, never to rule. Back when she still believed the world was built the way he described it. She thought about Ash. 6 years old, and still fresh enough, on nights like this one, to close her throat. And she thought about amber eyes finding hers across a pit full of failing light. About a man deciding, at real cost, in front of 300 witnesses, not to say the one word that would have made her safe and small and owned all at once. Whatever tomorrow brought. Whatever Isolde was already assembling in the dark under the pack house. Whatever the eastern packs would do the moment word reached them, that a Duskmere still drew breath. Whatever Marin's careful unreadable face had actually meant, back there at the rail. Tonight, Kestrel Duskmere was alive. Tonight, for the first time in 3 years, she had been seen. Completely. By everyone. And she had not disappeared. Outside her door, Grim let out one long low breath, and let his eyes close, one ear still turned toward the hallway. Still listening. Somewhere below the pack house, in a cell, with no window, and nothing soft in it, Isolde Ashbourne did not sleep at all. She sat with her spine straight, and her hands folded in her lap, and her mind already running 3 moves ahead of everyone upstairs, who believed tonight had settled anything. They thought this was an ending. She had sent riders once, and they had been too few, and they had been too late, and she had never told a living soul. She knew exactly what an ending looked like. This was not one. 7 days. That was how long it took Kestrel Duskmere to learn that surviving and being safe are not the same word. She had assumed they were. Which was naive, and she knew it now. 3 years of hiding had taught her a great deal about staying alive, and almost nothing about what comes afterward. About the strange unfamiliar weight of a life, where nobody is actively trying to kill you, and yet nothing has actually been settled. Because the tribunal hadn't started. Because the border scouts kept coming back, with reports that made Bastion's face go tight in a way she had learned to read the way farmers read weather. Because Grim still woke some nights snarling at shadows only he could see, and no amount of her gift, warm and gold, and patient as she pressed it, into the broken places in him ever reached all the way down to, where the worst of it lived. And because one stubborn exhausting corner of her mind refused to stop turning, over a single simple question. Why steal a pendant you already have the authority to move? Isolde was Luna. Had been Luna until 7 nights ago. She could have walked into that vault at noon with a full escort and nobody would have asked her a single question. No guard would have stopped her. No ward would have flagged her as an intrusion because she wasn't one. She was the second most powerful wolf inside these walls. So why sneak? Why lie? Why let a kitchen servant nearly be eaten alive rather than simply say, I moved it, I had reasons, ask me anything you like? Kestrel didn't have an answer. But she had learned a long time ago that questions like that one don't leave just because you stop looking at them. They sit at the back of your skull. Patient. Going slightly bad, the longer you leave them there. The morning of the 7th day found her in the training yard behind the eastern wing, kneeling in the dirt across from Grim, both palms flat against his enormous matted chest, eyes shut, reaching. Again, she murmured. Not to him. To herself. Because the gift did not work the way commanding worked. She had tried that once, in the first frightened days, after the arena. Tried to simply order the fractured pieces of him back into their proper places, the way you'd order a dog off a chair. It hadn't worked. Grim had whined and pulled back, hurt somewhere words couldn't reach. What actually worked was closer to listening. She let her power unspool out of her chest. Slow. Gold. Patient as honey finding the low point of a bowl. It wrapped around the ragged edges of his mind, without pushing and without asking. Just present. An open hand instead of a closed fist. Grim shuddered under her palms. A sound rattled up out of his chest that was not quite a growl and not quite a whine. The sound of an old wound being touched by something that, for once, did not hurt. He's still in there, she thought. Whoever he used to be. Buried. Not gone. Which was, she was beginning to understand, the entire tragedy of what a Lycan actually is. Not a monster that was born. A person who got lost. Trapped behind a door that slammed shut in the worst minute of their life and never opened again. You're getting better at that. Her eyes snapped open. Ronan stood at the edge of the yard, with his arms folded. 7 days, and she still hadn't worked out where the alpha ended and the man started. Or whether that was even the correct question to be asking about him. He's better. She kept her hands where they were, feeling Grim's breathing slow further under her palms. I'm not sure I am. You survived a Lycan pit. Exposed a corrupt Luna. Dropped a dead bloodline back into a territory that had already finished mourning it. He crossed the yard toward her, unhurried, the way he moved through most things. Inside a single evening. You're doing better than you're crediting yourself for. That was luck. Kestrel sat back on her heels, wiping dirt off her palms. This is work. Slow, ugly, uncertain work. Luck doesn't get you here. What does? Being too stubborn to stop. A ghost of a smile pulled at her mouth. The first honest one in days. I have a great deal of that. I had noticed. Something eased at the corner of his eyes when he said it, quick, gone again. He crouched beside her, careful, the way you approach something you'd rather not startle. Grim cracked one amber eye open, assessed him, and evidently concluded he was harmless, because the eye slid shut again immediately. May I? Kestrel blinked. May you what? Try. He held up one hand, palm open. An offer, not a demand. I've never done what you do. I'd like to understand it. If you're willing to show me. She studied him a moment. Because that request, small as it was, landed somewhere she had not expected anyone to reach so early. Nobody had ever asked to understand her gift. They had feared it, or wanted it, or tried to work out how to point it at something. Nobody had simply asked to look. Put your hand here. She guided his palm to a spot on Grimm's shoulder beside her own. Don't push. Don't command. Just listen. Whatever's underneath, let it come to you. Don't go in after it. Ronan's brow furrowed, with an intensity of concentration that Kestrel found almost unbearable, given that this was the same face that had, a week ago, silenced 300 wolves, with one word. For a long moment nothing happened at all. Then Grimm's ear twitched. Turned toward him. I feel something. Ronan's voice had gone quiet and startled. Small. Like a held breath. That's him, she said softly. Waiting to find out whether it's safe to let it go. Is it? I don't know yet. They stayed there a while longer, in silence. 3 creatures, each of them broken by something, each of them learning, unevenly, how to be put back together. It was the first quiet morning Kestrel had had in longer than she could remember. Which ought to have told her something. Because the quiet ones never last. She went down to the cells, that same afternoon. Told herself it was curiosity. Knew, underneath, that it was closer to necessity. An itch she could not leave alone, after a week of turning the same question over in the dark. Isolde sat exactly, as Kestrel had expected to find her. Spine straight. Hands folded. A woman who had decided that dignity was the one item in this cell that nobody could confiscate and intended to hold onto it with both fists until they pried it out. Come to gloat, Isolde said, without looking up. How disappointing. I expected better of you. I came to ask a question. That got the woman's eyes. Cool. Assessing. The look of somebody quietly recalculating an opponent she had previously written off as furniture. You had every right to walk into that vault, Kestrel said. Every right to move the pendant yourself, in daylight, and tell your son, over supper, that you'd done it. Instead you went in like a thief, and let me nearly die for it. She held the gaze. I don't think that was cruelty. Not entirely. I think it was fear. I want to know what you're actually afraid of. For a long moment Isolde said nothing. The silence stretched, so thin that Kestrel nearly turned for the door. Then, quietly, you already know. It's on your face. You felt it too, haven't you? Whatever's underneath that pedestal. Kestrel's breath caught. You knew it was weakening. I have known longer than I care to say out loud. Isolde's composure came apart at one seam, and something worn and old came through the gap. I did not steal the pendant to punish you, girl, whatever you've decided about me. I took it, because I was trying to reinforce the seal myself. Quietly. Before anyone else discovered how thin it had gone. I failed. And rather than admit that failure to a pack already frightened of a dozen other things, I let a theft become the more convenient story. At my expense. Yes. She did not flinch from it. At your expense. I won't pretend it was anything else. But understand me. I have spent 6 years watching what fear does to a pack that feels its foundations moving. I was buying time. I simply chose the ugliest available method of paying for it. 6 years, Kestrel said. And watched the woman's face. Because there it was again. The same thing she had caught at the rim of the pit. A tightening at the jaw. Eyes going somewhere past the wall of the cell, past the packhouse, past this decade entirely. That's twice now, Kestrel said slowly. You keep counting from 6 years ago. Not from when the seal started thinning. Not from when you took the pendant. From the year my family burned. Isolde's hands, folded so carefully in her lap, tightened around each other. Coincidence, she said. You're a poor liar in a cell. You were excellent at it upstairs. Get out. Not until. Get out. The words came fast, and cracked at the edges, and Isolde turned her face hard toward the wall, and Kestrel saw quite clearly that the woman's eyes had gone bright. Whatever you imagine you have found, girl, you have not found it. You have found the outside of it. Leave it there. Kestrel stood in that cell a moment longer, watching the back of a proud woman's head, and understood two things at once. That Isolde Ashbourne was hiding something considerably older than a stolen pendant. And that whatever it was, it did not make her happy. You should have trusted your son, Kestrel said finally, at the door. Instead of a story. Trust is a luxury, Isolde said, to the wall, for wolves who have never watched it fail them. Kestrel left with more questions than she had walked in carrying, and one cold new certainty settling in behind her ribs. Whatever was sealed under, that pendant frightened Isolde Ashbourne badly enough, that she had burned her own name rather than say its name out loud. Which meant it was worse than any of them had, yet let themselves imagine. The vault sat 2 floors under the packhouse, behind a door thick enough to stop a battering ram, wrapped in wards old enough, that Kestrel felt them prickling along her arms the moment she stepped into the corridor. She hadn't asked permission. She had simply come. 3 years of servant's instinct had made her very good at moving through a building without announcing herself, and the habit had outlived its usefulness by about a week, without showing any sign of noticing. The vault door stood open. Guarded, but the guard was a young wolf named Corin, barely out of his teens, who recognized her on sight and, after a visible internal debate about whether letting the alphas not yet declared anything wander into the vault unsupervised fell within his duties, simply stepped aside. Alpha said you've got free run of the house, he offered. A little uncertainly. Like he was still testing the shape of that sentence in his mouth. He did. She gave him a small grateful smile. Thank you, Corin. Inside, the vault was smaller than she'd expected. 1 stone chamber. Empty shelves on 3 walls, most of the pack's valuables moved out, while the tribunal sorted through what Isolde had and hadn't touched. Only the 4th wall held anything. A pedestal. There. Where the Duskfire pendant should have been. Kestrel crossed to it slowly, and the closer she came, the harder her skin prickled. Not only from the wards laid into the stone. From something underneath them. Older. Fainter. A second line of music running beneath a melody she already half knew. She reached out. Stopped. Don't, said some cautious remnant of the woman she'd been last month. You don't know what that is. Which is precisely why you have to, said the rest of her. She pressed her palm flat to the cold stone. And the gift in her chest, the one she had spent 7 days teaching to unspool gently for Grimm's sake, did not unspool at all. It surged. Fast. Involuntary. A current catching her sideways in water she'd assumed was ankle deep. Images arrived, layered over one another, too fast to separate cleanly. A hand. Not hers. Older, weathered, a man's hand, setting the pendant into this exact hollow. A voice chanting in a language she had never heard, and understood perfectly anyway. Not a ward. A seal. Something being held shut. Something vast, and old, and hungry, and that last word arrived, without her choosing it, and refused to be replaced by anything gentler. Held in place by the pendant's presence the way a stone holds a door against a wind that has all the time in the world. And underneath everything, one flat certainty, cold as well water. It is thinning. Kestrel gasped and staggered back, breaking contact, her whole body ringing with the aftershock. It's not a ward. She said it out loud, to an empty room, because saying it out loud made it smaller and more manageable than letting it sit silently inside her skull. It's a seal. It's holding something in. Which meant Isolde had not stolen a border ward. She had stolen a lock. Kestrel's mind ran ahead of her, fragments colliding. Because if the seal was weakening, if that impression was real, and not some trick of an untrained gift, then Isolde hadn't taken the pendant to hide it, or to use it, or to punish anyone with it. She had taken it because she was terrified. And she had needed somewhere to put the blame that wasn't herself. Which is why she picked me, Kestrel thought, the pieces sliding into place with a clean and horrible logic. Not because she believed I took it. Because I was the perfect distraction. A duskmere. A living symbol of everything this pack was already frightened of. Point at me, and nobody looks too hard at what she actually did with it, or why she needed to. She had to tell Ronan. Immediately. Except when she turned for the door, Corin was no longer alone at it. Bastion stood beside him, with his arms folded, watching her with an expression she couldn't place. Careful. Measuring. The same expression he'd worn in the pit, reading her death sentence off a scroll like it was an inventory of grain. Kestrel. Even. Nearly pleasant. I didn't expect to find you down here. I didn't expect to find anything either, she said carefully. But I did. Something moved in his face. Small. Almost too quick to catch. Did you? He said. And Kestrel, who had spent 3 years reading the smallest changes in a room's temperature purely in order to survive them, understood with a cold sinking certainty that Beta Bastion Reyes already knew exactly what she had just found. Which meant he had known it for a while. Which meant the real question was not what the pendant was. The real question was, who else already knew, and what they had been doing about it, while everyone upstairs was busy putting Isolde on trial. She didn't confront him. Not yet. Some old careful instinct held her tongue, the same instinct that had kept her alive in a house full of people who could have ended her with one careless sentence. She thanked Corin for his patience. Gave Bastion a polite, unreadable nod. Walked out of that corridor with her pulse hammering, and her mind already 3 rooms ahead, sorting back through everything she had watched him say and do since the night of the trial, hunting for the cracks she'd walked past. There were more of them than she wanted to find. The way he was always first to bring Ronan word from the eastern border. The way his face went carefully blank whenever Red Fang came up, instead of hardening the way every other wolf's did. The way he had argued, quietly and reasonably, and in exactly the tone of a man who believes himself entirely in the right, against increasing the border patrols. 3 days ago. In a meeting she had only half attended, because she'd still been learning which of Ronan's advisors could be trusted with the weather report. You missed it, she told herself, walking fast, hands curling at her sides. You spent a week watching his mother. And nearly walked past the man standing at his right shoulder the entire time. Except that wasn't quite fair, and some more careful part of her knew it. Bastion hadn't lied to her. Not directly. Hadn't threatened her, hadn't moved against her the way Isolde had. Whatever he was carrying, it wasn't the same shape as his Luna's crime. Which did not make it safe. It only made it harder to see coming. Marin found her in the corridor outside the kitchens 2 days later, hands still dusted white to the wrist, wearing an expression Kestrel had learned to recognize as trouble in a friendly coat. Can we talk? Somewhere quiet. They ended up in the old drawing room off the kitchen yard, sheets and bundled herbs hanging overhead, the 2 of them standing close the way they used to, when they were only servants trading gossip between chores. Before one of them turned out to be the last daughter of a murdered bloodline. You've been avoiding me, Kestrel said. Not an accusation. Just a fact set down flat on the table between them. I have. Marin didn't try to deny it, which Kestrel appreciated even as her stomach nodded. I don't know how to be near you anymore. Which sounds ridiculous out loud. You're still you. I know you're still you. But everyone else looks at you like you walked out of an old story now, and I keep catching myself doing it too, and then hating myself, because you're my friend. Not a legend. I'm still your friend, Kestrel said quietly. That part didn't change. I'll keep saying it until you believe me. Marin's eyes went bright, and she looked away fast, blinking hard. I have a brother, she said. Kestrel waited. Younger. 16. He works the northern stables. You've never met him, he keeps to himself. The words started coming faster, the way words do, when they've been held too long to come out neatly. A few months back somebody came to him. Offered coin for information. Small things, at the start. Who came and went from the pack house? Whether the Alpha traveled often. How many guards on the eastern gate at night? Kestrel went very still. Marin. I didn't know what it was for. Marin's voice cracked clean through. I swear to you. Not until I stood at that rail and watched them put you in a pit and understood, all at once, exactly what kind of information somebody might want about this pack. And why? I haven't slept properly since. Who approached him? He doesn't have a name. Only that the coin came from the east. Her hands twisted together. I should have told somebody the same hour I learned it. I didn't, because I was afraid of what they'd do to him. Afraid they'd treat him the way they nearly treated you. Guilty first. Questions afterward, if there's anything left to ask them of. Kestrel studied her friend for a long moment. The guilt sat plain on her face. The fear underneath it. And underneath that, the particular flattened exhaustion of somebody who has been carrying a secret too heavy for one person to hold. You're telling me now, she said. That counts for something. Does it? Marin's voice was very small. Or is it already too late? Kestrel didn't have an honest answer to that. So she gave the honest one she did have. We're going to Ronan, she said. Both of us. Tonight. Whatever this turns out to be, you're not carrying it by yourself anymore. Marin's whole face crumpled and reassembled. Tonight. Tonight. Before you have time to talk yourself out of it, and I have time to talk myself into handling it for you. They went at dusk. Kestrel had thought about doing it alone. Had actually got as far as the study door, with the whole speech assembled in her head, all the parts arranged in the order that made Marin look best. Then she stopped, in the corridor, with her hand halfway raised. Because that was exactly what everyone in this house kept doing to each other. Isolde carrying her fear alone. Bastian carrying his archive alone. Every single one of them deciding, privately, that the truth would land more softly, if they handled the delivery personally. And every single one of them making it worse. So she went back for Marin, took her by the wrist, and brought her along. Ronan looked up from a map when they came in. Took in Kestrel's face first, then the girl behind her, white to the lips, twisting her apron in both fists. Sit down, he said. Not unkindly. Marin did not sit down. Marin stood in the middle of the study, with her chin trembling, and told him everything, in the wrong order, doubling back twice, the way frightened people tell the truth, when they have finally decided to tell all of it. Her brother. The coin. The stranger's questions. The 4 months of not knowing. The week of knowing and saying nothing. When she finished, the room was very quiet. His name, Ronan said. Tomas. Marin's voice barely made it out. He's 16. He didn't understand what he was doing, Alpha, I swear it on. 16, Ronan repeated. He stood. Crossed to the window. Looked out at the dark yard for the length of several breaths, and Kestrel watched his shoulders, and could not read a single thing off them, which she found more frightening than shouting would have been. When I was 16, he said finally, I sold a saddle out of my father's stable to buy a knife I'd been told would make me impressive. Marin blinked. Alpha. He found out in a week. He made me work the stable for a season to pay it back, and he never once told the pack what I'd done, because he understood that a boy who is publicly disgraced at 16 becomes a man, with something to prove at 20. He turned around. Your brother is not going in a cell. He is going to sit in this room tomorrow morning and tell me every single question that stranger asked him in order, including the ones he thought were harmless. Because those are usually the ones that matter. Marin made a sound and put both hands over her mouth. Don't thank me yet, Ronan said. If he lies to me, or if he leaves anything out to protect himself, that changes. Tell him that tonight, exactly as I've said it. He'll believe it more coming from you. He won't lie. Good. Marin went, half running, the door swinging behind her. Which left the two of them, and a map, and the thing Kestrel had actually come to say. That's not all of it, she said. I assumed not. The pendant isn't a ward. She crossed the room and set both palms flat on his desk, because she needed something solid to hold, while she said the rest. It's a seal. Something's being held shut by it. And it's failing. Ronan went still. You're certain? I put my hand on the pedestal where it used to sit. I felt history. Intention. A warning, almost, like the stone was trying to tell me, before I even understood I was listening. She steadied herself. Whatever your mother took, she didn't take it out of spite. She took it because she is frightened of what happens when a seal like that finally goes. And she needed somebody else to blame, before anyone thought to ask why she'd need to move it at all. That's not a small accusation. No. It isn't. She held his eyes. And it isn't the last one either. Say it. Bastian knew. The words came out flatter than she'd intended, worn down by the effort of saying them at all. I don't know how much. I don't know how long. But he found me in that vault, and Ronan, he wasn't surprised. Not by a fraction. A man hearing a thing like that for the first time does not look at you the way he looked at me. For a long moment Ronan said nothing. She watched a dozen things cross his face in sequence. Disbelief first, quick and instinctive, the reflex of a man defending someone he had trusted with his life for years. Then something slower. Colder. The beginning of doubt, which is always the worst part, because doubt does not arrive alone. It arrives with every previous conversation attached, asking to be reread. Bastian served this pack before I was Alpha, he said finally. He served my father. He has never once given me cause. I'm not asking you to condemn him. She softened her voice, because she understood exactly what it costs to have your certainty about someone knocked sideways without warning. I'm asking you to watch him. Properly. The way I've had to watch everyone for 6 years just to keep breathing. Ronan exhaled long and slow and dragged a hand back through his hair. If he's been in contact with Red Fong. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. His eyes had gone hard. The patrol arguments. The way he's flattened every scouting report for a month. I took it for caution. I thought, he stopped himself. Shook his head once, sharp. I trusted him. That's the whole of it. There isn't a cleverer version. Trusting somebody and being wrong about them aren't the same failure, Kestrel said quietly. I learned that the expensive way too. Something eased fractionally in his expression. Some small acknowledgement passing between two people who had both had their trust used as a weapon and had both, somehow, survived the experience. We watch him, Ronan said. Quietly. No accusations. Not until we know what we're actually holding. And the seal. We find the pendant. Whatever it costs. The map on his desk had begun to look considerably more urgent than it had 10 minutes earlier. If it's failing, we don't have the luxury of waiting for a tribunal to establish motive first. Kestrel nodded, and neither of them said anything for a while, the weight of the evening settling into the room like a held breath nobody wanted to be first to let go of. Kestrel. His voice had changed. Thank you. For bringing the girl with you instead of carrying it in alone. You could have. I nearly did. She admitted it. I got as far as your door. What stopped you? Everybody in this house keeps deciding they can carry the truth better on their own, she said. It's going very badly for all of us. I thought I'd try the other thing. That night, she dreamed of Ash. Not the massacre. Not the version she'd had 1,000 times in 6 years, the one with the fire, and the screaming, and the smell of a home coming down on people who had never been given the chance to stand up. This was different. Quieter. Worse, in its own way. She dreamed of a door. Ancient. Stone. Set into the side of a mountain she did not recognize, in a place that felt older than the Duskmere line, older than any pack currently drawing breath. And behind the door, something pressing. Patient. Testing the give of the stone the way water tests the give of a riverbank, one slow inch at a time, in no hurry whatsoever, because it had all the time there was, and the door did not. Soon, said something on the other side. Not a voice exactly. More a pressure behind her eyes than a sound in her ears. Soon, little sealkeeper. Soon. Kestrel woke gasping, sheets wound around her legs, heart slamming so hard it ached. Grim was already at the side of the bed, already awake, a worried whine rattling out of him as he pushed his huge head into her shaking hands. It's fine, she whispered, and her voice shook far too much to convince either of them. It was a dream. Except it had not felt like a dream. It had felt like a message. And Kestrel Duskmere, who had spent 3 years learning never to ignore the cold small feelings that crawl up the back of the neck, understood in the dark, with Grim's warm weight pressed along her side, that whatever was sealed behind that pendant knew the pendant was gone. And that it was not remotely patient enough to wait forever. 3 days later, the scout came in bleeding. She heard it before she saw it. Raised voices in the courtyard below her window, that particular note of urgency that cuts straight through a well-run house's ordinary noise. She was down the stairs and out into the yard before she'd fully decided to move. A young wolf lay half collapsed against the courtyard wall, one arm hanging wrong, blood soaking through a bandage somebody had tied badly and fast. Ronan was already crouched beside him. Bastion a step behind. The look on both their faces told her everything, before anyone spoke. Red Fong. The scout got it out, through his teeth. Massing at the eastern ridge. Full war party. Draven himself. How many? 60. Maybe more. His breathing hitched. They're not hiding, Alpha. They want us watching them come. Kestrel's stomach dropped. 60 warriors, and Draven himself. She'd heard that name in the servants' hall, over the years, always in the specific hush reserved for things too dangerous to discuss casually. Red Fang's Alpha. A wolf whose reputation had outrun the available facts about him, the way reputations do, when the people best placed to correct the record are no longer available for comment. They know about me, she said. Not a question. The scout's eyes went to her. To the collar she still wore out of habit rather than need, and to the mark he clearly already knew was under it. They're not hiding that either, my lady. There's word running through every territory east of here. A living Duskmere. Sheltered by Ironclaw. His jaw tightened. They're not testing your borders anymore, Alpha. I don't believe this is about the pendant at all. Ronan's face had gone to stone. The same terrible stillness she'd seen once before, in the arena, in the seconds before he turned that stillness on his own mother. Get him inside. Full treatment. Whatever he needs. The guards moved. Ronan straightened and found her eyes across the yard, and for a long moment neither of them said anything, the shape of what was coming settling over both of them like weather. This is my fault, Kestrel said, once the yard had cleared enough that it wouldn't carry. If I hadn't been exposed. Don't. Sharper than she'd expected. You didn't ask for that arena. You didn't ask for any of it. If somebody put this pack in danger, it was not a girl, who spent 3 years hiding in order to keep every person around her safe. Then who did, she said, and it came out harder than she'd meant it to, 6 years of carefully swallowed anger finally finding a crack. Because somebody did. Your mother stole a lock she was too frightened to explain. Your beta's been holding something back for weeks. And now 60 warriors are on your ridge, over a bloodline I never asked to be born into. Her voice cracked on the last of it. I am so tired, Ronan, of being the reason bad things happen to people, whose only mistake was standing near me. For a moment he just looked at her. Something raw behind his eyes, that had nothing whatever to do with borders or strategy or war parties. You are not the reason, he said, low and fierce. You are the thing worth protecting. There is a difference, and I need you to understand it, because I have a feeling you're going to need that difference more in the next month than you've ever needed anything. Kestrel opened her mouth. Closed it. Because behind them, in the doorway of the pack house, Bastion stood watching the two of them, with an expression she couldn't read. Careful. Measuring. The same look he'd worn in the vault. She confronted him that evening. Alone. Because waiting for Ronan to do it felt wrong. Felt like handing off a debt that was at least partly hers. She found him in the small stone chapel behind the pack house, the one nobody used anymore except for funerals, and the occasional wolf, who still kept the old faith. He sat alone on the front bench, with his hands folded, looking at nothing. You knew about the seal, she said, shutting the door behind her. No preamble whatsoever. 3 years of careful diplomacy had apparently run out sometime in the last fortnight. Before I told him. You already knew. Bastion didn't turn around. Yes. The plainness of it startled her more than a denial would have. How long? 2 months. His voice was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. I found records in the old archive. Written in the hand of the first Alpha to hold this territory. The Duskfire was never a border ward. It was always a key. Ironclaw was given the keeping of it 200 years ago, when the last of the Duskmere line still living near the door could no longer hold the watch alone. He exhaled. The founding families knew exactly what they were building this pack on top of. They simply chose not to write it anywhere the pack would find it. And you told nobody. I told Isolde. He finally turned, and what was on his face wasn't quite guilt. Something heavier. She was Luna. It seemed the correct chain to follow. She swore she'd handle it, through proper channels, without frightening anyone. I believed her. A breath that wasn't a laugh. I have had a great deal of time to revisit that decision. And Red Fong. Her voice went hard. Is that proper channels too, Bastion? Because a boy came in bleeding this morning talking about 60 warriors on the ridge. And I know you've been in contact with them. I've been watching you do it for days, without understanding what I was looking at. His jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing, and she watched something exhausted behind his eyes finally reach the end of its patience. I have been in contact with Red Fong, he said. Not to betray this pack. To warn it. Draven has known about the weakening for months. Longer than I have, if his letters are honest. He isn't marching out of bloodlust, whatever the stories say. He's marching because he believes Ironclaw is no longer capable of holding what needs holding. He spread his hands, helpless. And after watching a tribunal drag on for a week, while that seal thins under our feet, I am not entirely certain he's wrong. Kestrel stared at him. Because that was not the confession she'd braced for. Not treachery. Not greed. None of the simple satisfying villainy she had half hoped to find under the careful mask, because simple villainy at least gives you something clean to hate. Fear. Wearing strategy's coat. The same shape as Isolde's crime. Cut from different cloth. You should have told him, she said, quieter now, the fury draining out of her, and leaving something closer to fatigue. Whatever your reasons. Going behind his back isn't caution, Bastion. It's the exact same mistake his mother made. You watched her make it. And then you made it yourself, in the next room. I know. Rough. And for the first time, since she'd known him, Bastion Reyes looked genuinely unsure of himself. I've known for weeks, and I did it anyway, because I could not construct a version of telling him, where he didn't hear Red Fong, and stop listening. And I was afraid that by the time he was willing to hear it, the seal would be gone, and it wouldn't matter what anybody believed. Kestrel sat down slowly on the bench across from him. Tell him. Tonight. And if he strips me, the way he stripped his mother, then that's the price of the choice you already made. She met his eyes. But if you say nothing and Red Fong moves, before he understands what he's actually facing, the price is going to be considerably higher than your title. For a long moment Bastion said nothing. Then he nodded. Small. Tired. A man setting down a weight he'd been carrying alone for far too long, and discovering it had been heavier than he'd let himself measure. Tonight, he agreed. He kept his word. Kestrel wasn't in the room. She'd insisted on that. Told him the reckoning between an alpha and the beta who'd served his father belonged to the two of them, and nobody else. She heard it afterward in fragments, in the careful tight way Ronan's voice came out, when he finally found her in the training yard past midnight, Grim curled at her feet, both of them watching the sky. He's not lying. He sat down heavily beside her without asking. I checked the archive myself an hour ago. Every word of it holds. How do you feel about that? Furious. He scrubbed both hands down his face. Grateful. Betrayed. All three at once, which I did not know the chest could accommodate, until roughly 9 o'clock this evening. He glanced sideways. Is that normal? You're asking the wrong woman about normal. I'm asking the only woman here. Then yes, Kestrel said. It's normal. It's also permanent, in my experience. You don't stop feeling all three. You just get better at knowing which one is currently steering. He huffed something that was almost a laugh, tired but real, and some small piece of tension went out of the space between them. I haven't stripped him, he said, after a while. I should. By every law this pack has ever run on, I should. He shook his head slowly. But he was wrong for different reasons than my mother was wrong. He wasn't protecting himself. He was trying, in the worst possible way, to protect all of us, from something he couldn't work out how to say out loud. So what happens now? Now I send word to Draven myself. Directly. Something grim settled into his voice. Because if he's half as reasonable as Bastion believes, there's still a version of this, where 60 warriors don't die on a ridge over a mistake that 3 different people made trying, badly, to fix the same broken thing. Kestrel was quiet a long moment, watching the stars, feeling her own gift simmering low and warm under her ribs. The same gift that had felt the seal thinning. The same gift that had heard something ancient and patient promising soon. Let me come with you, she said. Ronan turned sharply. Absolutely not. Ronan. She held his eyes and refused to look away, even though some exhausted part of her wanted very badly to. Draven isn't marching for a pendant. He's marching for me. For what my blood is supposed to mean. If there's a version of this, where 60 warriors go home, it does not begin with you standing in front of him alone explaining a danger he already understands better than either of us. It begins with him seeing what the Keeper's line was actually built to do. You'd be walking into the middle of an armed war party. I walked into a pit with a starving Lycan 2 weeks ago. Quiet. I've developed a small tolerance for terrible ideas that turn out to matter. Something in his expression cracked. Not a smile. In the neighborhood of one, worn thin with worry, and something warmer underneath, that neither of them had said out loud yet. "You are," he said slowly, "the single most stubborn woman I have ever had the misfortune of falling for." Her breath caught. Because that was closer to the word than either of them had come, since the arena. Closer than the careful restraint he had been holding for 13 days out of respect for a choice he'd insisted, from the first hour, belonged entirely to her. "You still haven't said it," she said softly. "No." Amber eyes catching the last of the starlight. "Not until you say it first. That was the arrangement I made, with myself in that arena, and I intend to hold to it. And if I never say it, then I'll spend the rest of a very long life waiting." He said it, with a quiet aching honesty that undid something in her more thoroughly than any declaration could have managed. "Because I am not interested in the version of this, where you're claimed instead of chosen. I told you that the first night. I meant it then. I mean it considerably more now." Kestrel looked at him for a long moment. The yard silent around them except for Grimm's slow breathing, and the distant settling murmur of a packhouse closing down for the night. "Tomorrow," she said finally. "We go to the ridge tomorrow. Together. And whatever the seal turns out to want from me, I want you standing there when it asks. Not because the bond says I should want that." Her voice softened, and some guarded wall inside her came quietly down. "Because I do. Because somewhere in the last 2 weeks, without either of us saying a word out loud, I already chose you." Ronan went very still. Then, slowly, carefully, like a man handling something he had been told was breakable, he reached over and took her hand. Neither of them said the word. But something had shifted, quiet and certain, as a seal thinning somewhere in the dark, and Kestrel understood, sitting under a sky full of indifferent stars, with Grimm's warmth against her feet, that whatever tomorrow put in front of her, she would not be meeting it the way she had met everything else in her life. Word came before dawn. Not from the ridge. From the north gate, where a single rider had come up under a banner none of Ironclaw's guards recognized. Dark red. One black thong stitched across the center. Unmistakable, once you knew. Not an attack. A messenger. Kestrel stood beside Ronan at the gate, as the rider dismounted. A young wolf, barely more than a boy, hands shaking slightly, as he produced a sealed letter, and held it out, with the desperate formality of somebody, who has been given very exact instructions, and is terrified of getting one of them wrong. From Alpha Draven. For the Alpha of Ironclaw. His eyes flicked to Kestrel, and stayed half a second too long on the collar. And for the Duskmere. Personally. Ronan took it. Broke the seal. Read it in silence, and Kestrel watched his jaw tighten by degrees, as his eyes went down the page. "What does it say?" He handed it over without a word. Her hands were not entirely steady. The handwriting was precise. Controlled. The hand of a man, who had rewritten this more than once, before deciding it said exactly what he meant. To the Alpha of Ironclaw, and to the last daughter of Duskmere. I have not come to burn your territory. I have come, because the seal our ancestors bled to build is failing, and I have watched for 2 months, while your pack argued over a stolen trinket instead of the truth underneath it. My patience for that argument is spent. I am told the girl carries the old gift. If that is true, she is the only living creature in either of our territories, who might actually understand what we are standing on top of. I will meet with her. Alone, if she is brave enough. Under truce, if her Alpha is wise enough to permit it. My warriors will hold the ridge, and nothing further. Whether they hold it in patience, or in war is no longer mine alone to decide. It is hers. Draven. Kestrel lowered the letter slowly, and the weight of that one word, hers, settled across her shoulders like something with actual mass. Because for 2 weeks she had been the reason bad things kept happening to people who stood too close. And now she was apparently also the only thing standing between 60 warriors, and a war that could open both territories to the bone. She looked up. Found Ronan watching her. Alone, he said, testing the word like it had gone bad in his mouth. I know. I don't like it. I know that too. She folded the letter, and pressed it against her chest, and made herself breathe past the fear climbing her throat. But this is the first thing, since that arena that's actually mine to do. Behind them Grim rose, from the gatepost, ears forward, gaze fixed east, were somewhere past the tree line 60 warriors, and their alpha were waiting to find out what a dead bloodline's last daughter intended to do, with the second chance she had been handed. She went to Grim first that night. Sat with him in the last of the light, hands buried in his fur, letting the gold unspool between them the way she had every evening for 2 weeks. I don't know what tomorrow is, she told him. I don't know if I come back the same. I need you to stay here. Watch this place. Watch him. She didn't have to say who. Grim's ears flicked. He pressed his heavy head to her chest, with a low mournful sound she felt more than heard. I know, she murmured. I don't like it either. She found Bastion next, in the study, bent over maps of the ridge, with the focused misery of a man trying to atone by working past exhaustion. He looked up, and something crossed his face. Guilt still, unresolved. But underneath it now, something steadier. I've drawn every approach Draven's scouts are likely to use, he said, without preamble. If tomorrow goes badly, I want Ronan holding every advantage I can hand him. It won't go badly. You don't know that. No, she admitted. But I've decided to believe it anyway. Between now and sunrise I can't see what the alternative buys either of us. Bastion studied her a long moment, something like respect settling in behind the tiredness. For what it's worth, he said. I'm sorry. For the vault. For all of it. I told myself I was protecting this pack, and instead I nearly costed its alpha's mate, before the two of them had the chance to choose each other properly. You're forgiven, Kestrel said. And mostly meant it, the way you mean a thing you're still working at. Prove it wasn't wasted. That's the whole of what I'll ask. I intend to. Last, she found Ronan on the eastern wall, alone, watching the dark line of trees. He didn't turn, though she knew he'd heard her coming, from a dozen paces. You're not going to try talking me out of it again. I tried twice today, he said, dry humor threading through the exhaustion. A third attempt would simply be unkind to both of us. She almost laughed. The sound caught somewhere in her throat instead, tangled with everything else she was carrying into tomorrow. Whatever happens out there, she said quietly, I need you to trust me. Not the bond. Not the bloodline. Me. He turned to face her, and in the low light his eyes held something that went well past restraint. Something raw and certain and entirely unguarded for the first time since she'd known him. I trust you more than I've trusted anyone in a long time, he said. Whether or not I've earned the right to say so yet. You earned it 2 weeks ago, she said. When you didn't say the word. When saying it would have been easier for both of us. They stayed on the wall along, while after that, saying very little. Below them the pack house slept, entirely unaware of how much was about to change. Above them the stars wheeled on, indifferent and constant, the same stars that had watched the Duskmere line, through 500 years of glory, and slaughter and whatever this was going to turn out to be. Kestrel let her head rest against his shoulder. Briefly. Just long enough to steal a little warmth against the cold of tomorrow. Promise me one thing. Anything. If I don't come back the same, she said, quieter still, don't let them turn me into a legend instead of a person. I've spent enough of my life being something other than myself. I'd like whatever comes next to still belong to me. Ronan's arm came around her. Careful. Steady. An anchor against a night that frightened her more than the arena ever had, because the arena had only wanted her life, and she was beginning to suspect that tomorrow wanted something she valued more. "You will always be Kestrel first," he said. "Whatever this pack, or that bloodline, or whatever is under that door decides to make of you. I'll see to it myself. If I have to fight every wolf in both our territories to do it." And somewhere beyond the tree line, though nobody could see it yet, the seal held a little longer than it should have. Thin as breath. Patient as hunger. Waiting to see what the last daughter of Duskmere intended to do about it. Dawn came gray. Then gold. Then gone, the way mornings do, when you're too frightened to actually watch one happen. Kestrel rode out alone. Not entirely alone. Grim padded at her horse's flank, silent, ears pinned forward. Ronan had wanted to come. She had said no. Because a truce built on one condition does not survive somebody breaking that condition inside the first hour. Because Draven had asked for her. Not an army. Not an alpha standing behind her like a wall. Her. So she rode. And the forest thinned. And the ridge came up ahead of her, dark with wolves, 60 of them, maybe more, standing along the tree line in ranks like a fence built out of muscle and old grief. At the center stood a man, who could only be Draven. Tall. Not as tall as Ronan. He didn't need to be. He carried himself like a blade that has already decided which direction it's swinging. Silver running through dark hair. Eyes the color of a winter sky, flat and assessing, fixed on her, from the second she crested the ridge. "You came," he said. "Not a question. You asked." Most wouldn't have listened. "I'm not most people." Kestrel dismounted. Slow. Steady. Because her knees were not currently to be trusted, and she would be damned if 60 wolves got to watch her legs shake. Neither are you, apparently. A war party that writes letters first. Something crossed his face that was nearly amusement. "I don't want war," he said. "I want the seal held. Before something wakes, that neither of our packs is built to fight." Then why 60 warriors? Because fear listens to strength faster than it listens to reason. Flat. Practical. Not proud of it. And because I needed to know, before I handed my people's safety to a stranger's bloodline, whether that stranger had the spine to walk into the middle of them and ask instead of hide. Kestrel held his gaze. "I'm done hiding." "So I see." Behind him the ranks shifted. Parted. And she understood, looking past them, exactly why he had chosen this ridge, and not some quieter place, with fewer witnesses. Because the ground fell away beyond the trees, into a shallow stone basin, half swallowed by moss and centuries. And at its center stood a door. Ancient. Carved. Set into raw rock, as though it had grown there rather than been built. The same door from her dream. Her stomach went straight through the earth. "You've seen it," Draven said, watching her face. "Before today. In a dream. 6 nights ago. Something spoke to me. It called me the Seal Keeper. Then it already knows you're coming." His jaw set. "Which means we have less time than I was hoping for." They walked down into the basin together. Which felt insane. Which felt like precisely the kind of decision that got people killed in the old stories her father used to tell, except her father wasn't here to stop her, hadn't been here for 6 years, and some cold orphaned part of her understood that she was the only person left alive who could do this at all. The door had no handle. Didn't need one. It had a hollow, carved directly into the stone, shaped exactly like the crescent on her own throat. "The pendant fit here," she said, understanding arriving in pieces too fast to catch cleanly. "Not just as a lock on a vault. As a key. For this." "Your Luna worked that out too," Draven said. 2 months ago. She sent a messenger east, quietly, asking what our archives held about the door. That's how I learned the seal was failing at all. A breath that wasn't a laugh. She was trying to fix it herself. Alone. Before anyone had to find out how frightened she actually was. Kestrel's chest tightened. Because it lined up. Every piece. Isolde's fear. Isolde's lie. A woman who had spent 6 years learning exactly how the world punishes anybody who admits out loud to being afraid. Where's the pendant now? With your pack. Locked away, last I heard. His eyes cut to her. Which means you don't have it. Which means whatever you're about to do. I don't need it. She said it, before she had entirely decided it was true. But something in her chest, that gold patient thing she had spent 2 weeks teaching to unspool for a broken Lycan's sake, was already reaching toward the door. Already recognizing it the way water recognizes the shape of a bed it has run through before. The pendant was never the seal, she said. It was a focus. Somewhere to put what the door actually needs, so that a keeper didn't have to stand here holding it in person. That's why it came to Ironclaw 200 years ago. Not because the door was made then. Because the last of my line living near it couldn't keep the watch alone anymore, and somebody had to. And the door. 500 years. She looked at the carving, at her own mark cut into stone by hands that had been dust for centuries. My family built it. And then spent 500 years dying to keep it shut, one generation at a time, and never wrote down why. She pressed both palms flat against the stone. And the world went sideways. Not literally. Not exactly. Except that it was the only way she could describe it afterward, to Ronan, to anyone. Like the ground had tilted without moving. Like her whole body had been dropped into water she couldn't feel the bottom of. Little Sealkeeper. The voice. The same one. Closer now, pressing against the inside of her skull like a held breath finally let out. You came. I came to close the door, she said. Out loud. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears, layered over something vast, and patient and old enough, that human words barely reached it. You came to try. Something like amusement moved through the pressure behind her eyes. Cold. Ancient. Not cruel, exactly. Just entirely indifferent to anything, as small as her fear. Your bloodline built this door 5 centuries ago. Your bloodline has been dying since, one generation at a time. Did you never wonder why? Her breath caught. Because she had wondered. For years. Why the Duskmere gift always cost so much. Why every wolf who had ever carried the crescent died young, one way or another, well short of their time. The door does not hold itself shut for free. It has always needed a keeper. Willing to give back a piece of themselves. Again. And again. To keep the seam from tearing wide. And if I refuse? Then it opens. Simple. Flat. Absolute. And everything your family died to hold back finally finishes what it started. Her hands were shaking against the stone now, her whole body trembling, with the effort of holding contact at all. Somewhere far above her she could hear Grim snarling. Could hear Draven calling her name, urgent, but it arrived, as though it were happening on the other side of very deep water. Choose, the voice said. Little Sealkeeper. Choose quickly. I am not patient enough to wait for the sun to move. She thought of her father. The old words in his mouth. Gifts to protect, never to rule. She thought of 3 years scrubbing floors, small and silent, and safe, and how none of it had ever been safety. Only waiting. She thought of Grim, folding himself down in a pit built for her death, recognizing something in her that she hadn't yet believed in herself. She thought of Ronan, choosing over and over, at real cost, not to claim her. Choosing to let her arrive at every decision on her own 2 feet, even the ones that frightened him. And she thought of Isolde. A woman so afraid of exactly this moment, that she had burned her own name down rather than admit she couldn't carry it alone. I won't make her mistake, Kestrel thought. I won't hide this either. I choose to hold it, she said out loud. To the door. To the voice. To 500 years of Duskmere daughters, who had come before her and paid this price in their own quiet unrecorded ways, and been buried young by packs, who never knew what they were burying. Not because I have to. Because I'm choosing it. There's a difference. I intend for it to matter. The pressure behind her eyes surged. Fought her. For one long terrible moment Kestrel felt herself being pulled toward something vast, and hungry and patient enough to have already waited 500 years, felt her own strength beginning to fray at the ends like rope pulled past its rating. And then warmth. Sudden. Solid. A hand closing over hers against the stone. Ronan. He hadn't stayed behind after all. You're not doing this alone, he said, low and fierce, his voice cutting through the pressure in her skull like sun through cloud. Whatever it costs. You're not paying it by yourself. Ronan. Say it. His palm pressed harder over hers. The word. Now. Because I am finished waiting for a perfect moment that clearly does not exist in either of our lives, and I would very much like to tell this door exactly what it's dealing with before it decides to take you off me. Kestrel laughed. Actually laughed. Wet and startled, and entirely unplanned, in the middle of the single most dangerous minute of her life. I love you, she said. There. Said. Are you happy? Extremely, Ronan said. And pressed his palm flat against hers against the stone. And she felt it. Felt the bond flare between them, gold meeting amber, two separate strengths braiding into one line. And the door, for the first time since she had touched it, went quiet. Interesting, the voice murmured, distant now, withdrawing. 2 keepers instead of 1. That has not been attempted in a very long while. Then nothing. The pressure lifted. The stone under her palms went ordinary. Cool and inert. Rock and carving, and nothing more, the crescent hollow settling into stillness like a breath finally released. Kestrel sagged. Would have gone down entirely if his arms hadn't caught her, pulling her back from the door, back into daylight, back into her own body. It's sealed, she managed. For now. I don't know how long. But it's sealed. Above them, on the ridge, 60 warriors watched their alpha lower his weapon. And Draven came to the basin's edge, with an expression Kestrel had not expected to find on that particular face. Something that looked unmistakably like relief. They didn't ride back that day. Because Draven's scouts came in at mid-afternoon, with a boy between them. Not one of his Ironclaws. 16 years old, stable dirt on his knees, terrified past the ability to form a whole sentence. Tomas. He had followed the war party's trail on a borrowed horse at dawn, which was possibly the stupidest thing anyone had done that week, and there had been considerable competition. I know his face, the boy said, the moment he saw Kestrel. He was shaking. The man who paid me. I know his face. He's here. The basin went very still. Say that again, Draven said. Quietly. He's here. Tomas pointed, with a hand that would not hold steady, out past the ranks, toward the tree line, where a knot of red Fang warriors stood apart from the rest. The tall one. With the burn on his hand. He came to the stable 4 times. He paid me in Eastern coin, and told me it was for the good of both packs. Draven turned his head very slowly. And Kestrel watched an alpha discover, in front of 60 of his own warriors, that the rot had not been in the pack across the border. It had been standing at his shoulder the entire time. The man with the burned hand ran. He got perhaps 40 paces before Grimm brought him down, and Kestrel would remember afterward that the Lycan did not kill him. Simply put one enormous forepaw across his chest and held him against the moss, with an expression of profound, ancient patience, and waited for the humans to catch up. There were 4 of them, in the end. 4 warriors from a faction inside Red Fang, who had spent 2 months buying scraps of information out of a frightened stable boy. Not because they cared about a pendant. Because a weakening seal was the perfect excuse for a war they had wanted for years, and because a living Duskmere sheltered by Ironclaw was a story that would light every territory east of the ridge if it were told the right way, by the right mouth, at the right moment. They had not been working for Draven. They had been working around him. 2 months, Draven said. He was looking at the 4 of them, where they knelt in the moss. His voice had gone flat in a way Kestrel recognized, because she had heard the same flatness in Ronan's voice in an arena. I wrote letters. I sent messengers. I did everything a reasonable man does. And you were behind me the whole time, sharpening it. None of them answered. Take them east, he said finally. All 4. My territory will hear the whole of it. Every word. From my own mouth, in the open, before any of them hear a cleverer version from somebody else. And then he turned to Kestrel, and something in his face had come apart at the edges. I nearly brought 60 warriors down on your border, he said, because 4 men wanted me to. You wrote a letter first, Kestrel said. That's the only reason any of us are standing here. It was very nearly not enough. Nearly isn't the same as wasn't. She held his eyes. I've spent 6 years learning that difference. It's most of what I have. Draven looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something that made every one of his warriors go rigid along the ridge. He inclined his head. Not deeply. Not a bow, precisely. But an alpha, in front of his own war party, acknowledging a woman who had walked up that ridge alone that morning with nothing behind her but a Lycan and a decision. When it thins again, he said, send word. My pack will come. Not to the ridge. To the door. The truce held. Draven's warriors withdrew by evening, and word rode east ahead of them faster than any messenger could have carried it. A living Duskmere. An Ironclaw Alpha. Both hands on the same stone. Which left one thing unfinished. Kestrel insisted the tribunal happen in the open courtyard. Not a closed council room, with 6 men and a door. Insisted Isolde be permitted to speak in full rather than simply be read a verdict at. Insisted Tomas be brought forward too, trembling, to tell his own small piece of a much larger truth in front of the entire pack. So that whatever happened to him afterward happened, where everyone could see it, instead of somewhere quiet. Ronan gave him a season in the stables, and no cell at all, and nobody in that courtyard argued, because they had all watched the boy ride out alone after a war party to say a thing he could have kept to himself forever. Then it was Isolde's turn. She stood in front of the assembled pack, with no chains on her, which Kestrel had also insisted on, and for a long moment she said nothing at all. The courtyard waited. I have prepared several versions of this, Isolde said finally. I have been preparing them for 2 weeks. All of them were better than the truth. That is generally how I have lived. She looked out over the pack she had spent 30 years being frightened for. I took the pendant because the seal was failing and I could not bear to say so out loud. I accused an innocent woman because I needed the pack looking somewhere other than at me. Both of those things are true, and neither of them is the worst thing I have done. Kestrel felt the courtyard go very quiet around her. 6 years ago, Isolde said, a messenger came to this house at night. From the Eastern Territories. He told me 3 packs had moved against Duskmere, and that it would happen before dawn. Kestrel stopped breathing. I sent riders, Isolde said. 11 of them. It was what I could send, without waking my son, who was young then, and who would have taken the whole pack east and lost half of it. I told myself that was strategy. Her voice did not break. It simply thinned, the way ice thins. It was fear. I sent 11 men to a slaughter that needed 100, because 100 would have meant explaining, and explaining would have meant the pack knowing that I was afraid. She looked directly at Kestrel for the first time. They arrived after sunrise. There was nothing left to arrive at. 4 of them didn't come home either. Her hands were shaking, and she made no attempt to hide it. I have carried those 11 names for 6 years, and never once said them out loud. And then a girl, with your face, walked into my kitchen, and I let 3 years go by pretending I hadn't recognized her the first week. The silence in that courtyard was total. You knew, Kestrel said. Her own voice came out strange. The whole time. You knew who I was. From the first month. Isolde's chin came up, and it was not pride this time. It was a woman refusing to look away from her own accounting. Which is why I could not have you exposed. Because if the pack learned you were here, they would eventually learn how you came to be an orphan, and how few riders went east that night, and whose decision that had been. You put me in a pit. Yes. With a starving Lycan. Yes. No excuse arrived after it. I have no defense. I have only the truth, which I have discovered is considerably heavier than the alternative, and which I should have set down here 6 years ago, when it might still have done somebody some good. Kestrel stood there in the middle of a courtyard full of 300 people, and felt something enormous shift inside her chest. Because she had come here wanting a villain. And she had found, instead, a frightened woman, who had made one cowardly decision at midnight, and then spent 6 years building an entire fortress on top of it, adding a wall every time somebody came near the foundation. Which was, she understood, exactly what she herself had done. Different fortress. Same architecture. She stepped forward. 11 names, she said. Isolde blinked. What? You said you've carried 11 names for 6 years. Kestrel's voice carried further than she'd meant it to. Say them. Here. Out loud. In front of everyone. Kestrel. That's my sentence, she said, turning to Ronan, to the pack, to all of it. Not a cage. She doesn't deserve a cage, and more to the point, a cage doesn't fix a single thing that's broken here. She deserves to have to say them out loud, in daylight, and then she deserves to be given something useful to do with the rest of her life. She turned back. Say them. And Isolde Ashbourne, who had never in 30 years let this pack watch her cry, stood in the courtyard, and said 11 names, and her voice broke on the 4th one, and she said the remaining 7 anyway. When she finished, nobody in that courtyard moved. The Eastern Archive needs a keeper, Kestrel said. Everything my family wrote down, and everything they didn't. Somebody has to sit in that room and raid 500 years of it, and find out what else we don't know about that door before it thins again. She met the older woman's eyes. You've spent 6 years frightened of what's buried in there. Go and be frightened of it usefully. Isolde's eyes, when they lifted, held something that was not gratitude. Closer to disbelief, that mercy had arrived, from the one direction she had never thought to guard. Why, she said quietly. Because somebody in this house has to stop repeating the mistake, Kestrel said. I'd rather it stopped with me. Bastian found her, that evening in the training yard, where all of it had quietly begun, grim, stretched out in the last warmth of the day beside her. He's reinstated me, he said. No preamble. He had apparently decided that plain honesty suited him better than careful diplomacy, having tested both. Conditionally. Every decision I make on the eastern border gets reviewed. A year, minimum. Do you resent it? No. He said it simply, and she believed him. I earned it. Worse, I nearly cost this pack everything trying to fix a problem quietly rather than trusting the people I serve to face it with me. He paused. I wanted to thank you for speaking for me when you had no reason to. I didn't speak for you because it was easy, Kestrel said. I spoke for you because fear made you careless. Not cruel. There's a difference. I've been learning to look for it in people lately. I'm getting faster. Bastion studied her a long moment. You'll make a fine Luna, Kestrel Duskmere. Ask me again when I've survived a year of it. Marin came not long after, hovering at the yard's edge, hands twisted in her apron. My brother is mucking out stalls until spring and telling everyone who'll listen that he tracked a war party, Kestrel said. He'll be insufferable by autumn. He'll also be alive and known for the right thing, which is better than most people manage. Marin laughed and cried at approximately the same moment, which is the only honest response available to some weeks. I don't know how you carry all of it, she said. The bloodline. The door. And still have room left for one frightened stable boy. Because the alternative is becoming somebody who stops noticing the small ones, Kestrel said. I watched what that did to Isolde. I'd rather stay exactly the size I already am, and simply carry a little more than I used to. They sat together in the fading light a long while, the old ease between them rebuilding itself one ordinary sentence at a time. Grim changed in the 4th week. Kestrel had been working with him every evening, unspooling that gold patient thing into the broken places, expecting nothing, because expecting nothing had become its own kind of discipline. Then one evening he lifted his head and looked at her, and the yellow was gone out of his eyes. Amber. Clear. And behind them, unmistakably, somebody home. He couldn't speak. She wasn't certain he ever would. But he put his enormous head into her lap and made a sound that was not a Lycan sound at all, and Kestrel sat in the dirt of that training yard and wept like she had not permitted herself to weep in 6 years. There you are, she said. There you are. I told them you were in there. 3 days later, under a full moon that put silver on every stone in the courtyard, Kestrel Duskmere stood at Ronan Ashbourne's side, while an entire pack knelt. Not from fear this time. Not from dominance. From something chosen, freely, in the open, with the whole story known. Grim sat at her feet, with those clear amber eyes, watching the ceremony, with an expression that came as close to pride as a Lycan's face can manage. Luna Kestrel Duskmere, Ronan said, and his voice carried across the courtyard the way it had on that first terrible night, except that every single thing about the sound of it had changed. Last daughter of a bloodline this world tried to erase. Keeper of a door that is still shut, because she chose, twice now, to hold it instead of run. He turned to her. Amber catching moonlight. Catching her, the way it had, from the first moment in the pit, when she had been chained, and accused, and entirely alone. Mine, he said. Soft enough that it was only ever meant for her, even with 300 witnesses standing close enough to hear. Yours, Kestrel answered. And meant it fully. Freely. Chosen instead of claimed. The bond flared gold, and warm and utterly unhidden between them, and when the courtyard erupted, it was not in fear. It sounded, unmistakably, like hope. And far below them, in a basin overgrown with moss and old grief, the door stood quiet under the same moon. Not because it had forgotten what it wanted. It had not forgotten anything in 500 years, and it was not going to start now. But because for the first time, since her family cut a crescent into that stone, it had found a keeper who was not holding it shut out of duty, or terror, or a promise made by somebody dead. She was holding it shut because she had looked at the whole cost, out loud, in daylight, in front of everyone. And chosen it anyway.